It's all Chicago all the time. I've had nothing but Chicago on the brain, and I've actually started to hate the Chicago Fire a lot more this week than I ever have before. They just haven't been relevant
Right.
in my life before, and then all of a sudden 2 times in 1 week and hearing the, in my opinion, garbage marketing that they're putting out about, like,
Yeah.
the CHI is greater than STL and those god awful
Be
videos.
bad.
Like, I mean, real bad. And then the fact that they beat us, it's
Well,
like there's a quote that Bradley Carnell had from the press conference that I hope finds its way onto the pod. That's like, I'm gonna have to pull up my Twitter account because I tweeted it. He mentions like something has to happen for a rivalry to form, right?
yeah.
And now he says, all right, something's happened. We just have to make sure that we're not
Yeah.
constantly losing so that we can make
On
it a
the
back and
losing
forth.
side of the story, yeah.
Yes, yes.
I also realized it was quote rivalry week for MLS, and so that part of it too, it almost felt like those videos and that stupid hat were feeding into. MLS was like, really push the rivalry week, guys. Do some marketing,
which is funny because Chicago's never had a good rival. We're kind of it now for them, but at the same time, we're betrothed to another over here.
Yeah, absolutely, the hate is strong.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like, all right, Chicago, we hate you just because you're Chicago, but we've got a legit soccer rivalry going on over here.
Yeah, well, hopefully, I think that's going to be the theme of the night. Hopefully, this isn't like a problem. This Chicago thing, we'll see.
No, the new manager bounce kind of pisses me off. Like, why did they have to have to fire Hendrickson this week?
Yeah, it's interesting. That coach just on the sidelines doesn't look like a leader that everyone would want to,
No, but the weird thing is, I was watching, they've got the MLS previews up on the season pass. And so I was watching ours.
Reminds me of Dave Sarachan. I was trying to think of an example.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Sorry to interrupt.
Well, Weeby made a comment about how Klopas is a steward of the club, basically. So he's a fire guy through and through. He's been with them for, since before some fans were born, type of thing. And to have that, I wouldn't necessarily say like you're trying to impress the new coach. It's just that this guy is one of you. So I could see them wanting to play for him and putting their all out.
Me too.
And my God, if it wasn't
Leonard at St. Louis FC was the assistant for every coach. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
It'd be like him taking over. I think the guys would really respect him.
Yeah.
Like that. Same way.
Yep.
Okay, well, yeah, 8:45. You ready?
Give me just a moment.
Sure.
Real quick. Time flies when we were talking. I didn't even realize it was already 8:45.
Yeah.
All right, I'm ready when you are.
Okay. Those are all the questions we got on Twitter that you put down there?
I think so.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
I meant to check to see if you got them all before we started, and I think that's all I saw too. So
I'm fairly certain.
Carver's on. What's up, Carver?
Yo.
Hitting record. Welcome everyone to Flyover Footy. You might be listening to us on the big 550 KTRS. We are here to talk about the Open Cup a little bit, and then we're going to lead you into the next Chicago Fire game. It's a bit of a doubleheader, if you will, at least as close to a doubleheader as you'll get in soccer. So I've got the usual Matt Baker to join me here. Matt, you've had a hard week, right?
It's been a long week. Parental wise, it's one of those weeks that you live to tell stories about. But I'm happy to be on this side of it. I'm happy to be talking about the Chicago Fire. Well, I'm happy to be talking about the second Chicago Fire game. I don't think there's too much to be happy about talking about the first one, but it's always interesting when you get a double leg matchup away and away. I don't think it's anything we expected when we entered the league, and maybe never happen again. You never know. So might as well soak it in while we can, I guess.
Yeah, it's an unusual situation, but it does happen in every country in the world
Sure.
when it comes to soccer, or every soccer country in the world. So it's a weird one, but mark it down as in the first season we got to do this away and away matchup with Chicago Fire because of the Open Cup. But unfortunately, it's not one we're going to want to remember, as Matt was alluding to there. It was a 2-1 loss to the Chicago Fire, not starting lineup. So I think there's going to be a little bit of difference between what we talk about in the game that happened and the game that will happen. But Matt, as usual, let's start with the starting lineup and dig into it.
A little bit of a rotation that we had, but we still brought a strong lineup against the Fire in our first game. And so it's going to be important to know what went right, what went wrong as we try to bounce back. So we started the Open Cup Fire match with Ben Lunton goal. Selmer Pedro, Kyle Hebert, Tim Parker, and Akil Watts were our back line. Miggy Perez and Edward Leuven were in the midfield. Isak Jensen, Aziel Jackson, Jared Stroud, and Celio Pompeu were our attackers in kind of a 4-4-2 where Isak Jensen was more up top with Celio Pompeu. It was tough to tell at times where he was and where he was lining up on the field, but Bradley Carnell confirmed in the press conference on Thursday that he did move Isak Jensen, playing him a little bit out of position from his left wing, left mid role to be a little more up top with Celio Pompeu. And I think it kind of speaks to the commitment to the 4-4-2 or the 4-2-2-2, depending on how you look at it, and the way that we oftentimes find success in our strikers playing off of each other and putting that pressure vertically, trying to find space vertically. I thought it was a decent lineup. You saw some good rotation from the abandoned FC Dallas match where you had Tim Parker, who was going to be suspended for this next Fire game. You had Kyle Hebert. Kyle Hebert sat that last game. Parker's not available. So you saw some guys who they're rested or they're going to be rested, and so you run them out. But then you also saw Miggy Perez, you saw Edward Leuven, guys, Celio Pompeu, who they didn't play too many minutes. Leuven in general just is a workhorse. He never gets off the field. So it made sense to have somewhat of our half and half starting lineup, which kind of mirrored Chicago's. And I thought it was smart of Carnell in particular to rest Hebert in the FC Dallas match. You obviously don't know that game's going to be abandoned and you're only going to play 51 minutes, but I'm interested on your thoughts, Phil, about, how that lineup kind of came to fruition. And especially because, we could see all of these guys this coming weekend against the Fire in the second leg. It's been 5 days since Tuesday. That's a pretty full rest. So a lot of these guys should be available.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's possible. And so I don't think we'll, feel weird about Leuven starting again, which is the one that I think we'll definitely be hoping the most for. But, looking at, Jensen at playing up top, we did see him play there with City 2. Mm-hmm. It was about equally as effective, unfortunately, in that scenario. But looking at Jensen's frame and his style of play, him as a striker is not a strange thing at all. I thought that made sense. And, there's that storyline that's been going for the last week of Carnell starting guys who are with the hot hand, right? So we saw Pompeu there for that reason. I think Jackson got the start for that reason as well. And I thought Jackson was playing more of a 10 role, but with that guy, who knows? Who cares? He does float a lot, no matter. I'm not sure what his instructions are, but he does go all over the place.
All over the place. I mean, there's no really stopping him. He didn't make a lot of movements to the left, which were commented on social media, but he did cut in quite a bit from his starting position.
Yeah, it's cool. He can make some moves. He can make guys miss. And, it's the kind of thing that Leuven can kind of do. But, the thing that Leuven can do after that is complete a pass. And I think Jackson was a little rough in that regard. I think in the last couple matches, even though he was successful against Omaha. But Matt, I wanted to ask you one question. I know we're kind of backtracking a little here, but what were your thoughts about Hebert not starting against Dallas? And my question, maybe my thoughts were, is do you think Hebert is now behind? Why am I blanking on his name? Who started
Bartlett?
it? It's Bartlett. Thank you. Yeah. Do you think
No,
Bartlett or?
No, I think it was, and we talked before the FC Dallas match about Hebert being the one player last year for City 2 who started and played all 90 plus minutes in that week long stretch where we had Next Pro, Open Cup, Next Pro. And so we thought he could do it again. But when you have the depth at center back that we have now, where Lucas Bartlett has started MLS matches, we know he is at least borderline at this level where he can be relied on to partner with Tim Parker. And there's some familiarity and there's some comfort in having him in the lineup. I think it just provides that extra depth where you have the freedom to rest a Kyle Hebert. For the first time, he received rest when he's healthy and available so that he's ready to go for these next 2 matches. It was a tight turnaround from Saturday to Tuesday, so I didn't read anything into it more than it was just an ability to rest him Kyle Hebert, who doesn't get much rest.
Yeah, well, I want to come right back to that. Let's put a pin in that just for a second, because I'd like to start talking about the first goal that Chicago scored in the 3rd freaking minute.
Yeah.
You want to talk about it, and I think we have a bit of conversating to do about maybe how that went down.
Well, Bradley Carnell was very forthcoming in the disappointment in how they started the match. In the press conference on Thursday, he alluded to it seemed like guys were still in their headspace in the locker room, and it seemed like they weren't fired up to start the game. And that was very obvious. If anybody goes and rewatches the match on BR Football's YouTube page, the first 3 minutes it's not completely asleep at the wheel, but wow, are we on our back feet and we're not winning second chances. We're not winning aerial duels. We're giving up space. And in particular, the way the goal was scored by Hale Salisi, it was a goal kick, and then it was a header from us back to their end. And then it was a borderline violent header by Mauricio Pineda, who led Hale Salisi in the most perfect spot. And the thing that disappointed me is that Hale Salisi was right behind Pedro the entire time. While those headers were going by, Hale Salisi didn't move necessarily from right behind Pedro. He was, in my opinion, the way I saw Pedro at the time, Pedro's like, oh, this guy's in an offside position. So he's not attempting to play him on or to make sure that he's man marking him when he's right behind him. Now, Kyle Hebert was also next to him a few yards away, but when the ball was headed over by Pineda, it was in a perfect spot that Hale Salisi was off and running, and there was no stopping him. He had a clear shot to goal, and it did catch a deflection, and I'm sure that helped. But the sheer fact of him being in that position to outrun or outstretch our defense was incredibly disappointing. And the thing that got to me on the replay of that is Tim Parker kept him onside. Tim Parker, who is 2 defenders across, kept him onside. And that's not anything against Tim Parker necessarily. It's just the way the back line wasn't cohesive in that way. Like if you're Selmer Pedro, and at the time I was absolving Pedro of it, but I've kind of come around to think, okay, well, I asked Bradley Carnell today on that Thursday about, did he feel like there was a miscommunication on that back line the way the first goal happened? And he pressed me on it. And I said, okay, well, it seemed like Selmer Pedro was purposefully not playing him as deep as he should have, thinking that he was offside. And Carnell told me that, well, Selmer Pedro had the perfect line of sight to the rest of the back line, being that last defender across who has an angle to see what that line looks like. And you can read that comment 2 ways, honestly. You could read it as if Carnell was saying I'm wrong, and Pedro thought he was onside and had that side, and everybody really thought he was offside. Or you could read it taking into consideration a comment that I asked again last week after the match about Selmer Pedro's performance. And Carnell was not very glowing in his responses to Pedro about he still has work to go. He still has to prove himself in training and keep fighting hard. And we're going to work with him. So coupling that comment post game with that phrase about how Pedro had the perfect line of sight, I'm not convinced that Carnell wasn't alluding to Pedro being at fault there.
Okay, so I want to throw some other options out there.
Please do, because I just went off.
Yeah, no, I think that's quite possible. That is, like, we could say that's the end of the story. I think 2 other thoughts here I tend to be a guy where I'm not sure if it was any one person's fault, because I think some things could have been done. First of all, I think the main thing we can say here is I agree with you that everyone was a bit on the back foot, felt like they hadn't woken up and really hit this game really from the start. And so you saw Hebert step, which he's really good at. I think it's one of the things he's best at. He stepped really high upfield to get a header. And I'm curious whether, if John Nelson was in this game, whether John Nelson would have slid over a little bit and backed up in case of, seeing Selassie there. Perhaps he would have stepped back just to be more cautious, right? Just to make sure that we're covered in case someone forgets him. Because I do think that's perhaps what happened is, Parker didn't look over there because that's pretty far away. We saw Hebert step up and he kind of stayed up. That's what bothered me about Hebert. If you were to put any blame on Hebert, is Hebert kind of stayed up thinking if they send a ball over the top, someone's got it. Perhaps Berkey would have come out of goal, which is quite possible. Or perhaps, again, this is something that perhaps we want to watch in the future. If you think about it while you're watching the game, if you see Hebert step, what does John Nelson do normally? And so was this just a familiarity thing? Can we watch in the future to see, would John Nelson have had his back? Meaning, should Pedro have had his back? Or, in another day, if he was used to playing with Pedro, maybe he would have stepped, headed it, and ran back immediately to make damn sure that no one was going to get behind him. So just some thoughts to throw out there, to some things to look in the future of. But, a little bit of communication, even Pedro saying, Hebert, back up, he's back, man, Robert behind you or whatever. So I do think they just misplaced him and he got through on a good ball. They caught us flat-footed. But yeah.
And the bummer of it all is we heard from Miggy Perez after the game, that goal early completely changed everything. The fire dropped back. They weren't pressing as hard. They weren't taking it to us as they were those first 3 minutes. So once they had that first goal, it's not a park the bus situation, but it definitely is fall back and bunker down in a sense situation. Yeah. So it didn't allow us to play how I think we're going to be able to play this Saturday, which is a little more free, a little more punch, counter punch type thing, where there's a lot more free flowingness to the game. If you win those counterattacks, or if you win those second chances, you're creating the counterattacks. You're able to play your style because Chicago's style is very similar. We talked about what their style is on the Fallout show, which previewed the Open Cup, and it's very similar to us. So by Chicago scoring early, it kind of changed the entire thing. Mm-hmm. It's almost not even worth looking at a lot of the way that we played the rest of the game, just because you look at possession numbers, like 57% possession to St. Louis. That's a byproduct of Chicago scoring that first goal and being able to say, all right, St. Louis, you take the ball and you try to beat us now. You try to break through our lines. We don't have to. We already have the lead. We're good. And then you see what happens in the second half. It's just, a continuation of mistakes and trying to do too much with the ball and trying to be a little too fancy and getting caught way too deep in your own end. And so the mental lapse that happened in the second half by Lund, allowing the second goal, is just Chicago making St. Louis work with the ball and putting the ball in dangerous spots, but never really having success with that. And so they're able to counterattack very well when they can pick and choose their opportunities, and we're just trying to send the ball or not having success with getting the ball deep and creating chances.
Yeah. And, I think it was massive to see them sit back after the 3rd minute goal. If St. Louis had scored a goal early, that's not what would have happened. Nope. But I think Chicago knew that when they get the chance, they want to sit back and hit us on the counter. And I think the biggest thing, I'm going to hammer this at the end, but I want to mention it here too. Taylor Twal, this is how I felt after that game, because I say it over and over, we've seen the Rapids successfully do this to us. Minnesota got us. We've seen any team that bunkers successfully, that second Portland game, they bunker against us successfully. They pick their moments, they counter on us, and all they got to do is score once. And then the game totally flips on its head. And Taylor Twellman put it best in that regard. He said, this is the blueprint. The blueprint is out on St. Louis City on how you beat them. If you can score the goal first, or even if you don't, just sit back, bunker, counter, catch a goal on the counterattack. And so, this is the next step is, can we figure out how to beat this? And right now, I think to some degree, the question is, can we figure out how to beat this without Klaus playing a game? And I think, you talking about wasted chances, too fancy. I'll say I don't mind it being fancy. Sometimes someday you're going to get a goal on that, but just missed connections were driving me crazy in that.
Yeah.
And it's not just St. Louis's fault. It's the fact that there's a salary cap. These teams are all close already. We don't have our DP. And we can't score a goal on a bunkered defense. It's very difficult. We even saw Kansas City beat Seattle on exactly that playbook. One of the best teams in the league.
And it's interesting because it's in some ways a better position to be in for St. Louis. So if there's a silver lining to being in this position of a team has figured out the blueprint to St. Louis, it's that there is a blueprint to figure out. And teams have made that connection already. So we're not starting, and we're not in May saying, wow, we still have yet to put something together. We still have yet to figure out our identity. It's not that teams haven't figured us out because we haven't figured ourselves out. It's a case of we figured ourselves out. We started off 5-0 because we knew exactly how to play and how to win against teams. But then you see that exact thing, figuring out the blueprint, bunkering down, the low block, making St. Louis possess the ball. Okay, so teams have figured out that's a way to counter what we started as success. Now we just have to counterpunch it. We have to figure out how to figure out the blueprint, right? So it's chess, and it's the next level, the next iteration, the evolution of our system is how to figure that out. Because let me tell you, Phil, if we figure out the blueprint against us, that's going to make all kinds of chaos for other teams' defenses. They're not going to be able to know which way you need to attack St. Louis, which way you need to defend St. Louis, because they can beat you in multiple ways, not just sending the ball, not just the verticality, not just the hold-up play that our striker has, but figuring out the low block. That once we figure it out, and I firmly believe there will come a time soon, whether it's when Klaus is back and when Alm is back or not, that we figure that out. And that's going to be another game changer this year for St. Louis.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's a long season, and there's a lot of time to figure that out. And our staff's been good. This is just our first massive adjustment that we've had to work on, of a bunch of smaller ones getting in the way as well. I want to say, pardon me, we are Flyover Footy. You're listening to us on the Big 550 KTRS. Thank y'all for joining us. I think we need to put some time. We've got a little more time because we're talking about Chicago Fire twice. We got to put some time into the Miguel Perez goal, right? His first goal. It's a big deal.
And off of his chest.
Off his chest, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I saw some people after the game saying, well, it's a bummer that he got his first goal when this was the result. No, it's never a bummer when you get your first goal. I'm sorry, but it doesn't matter how the game works out. There's always something positive to take away, and this cannot be overlooked. Bad things happen, or good things happen in bad games, and vice versa. This is a very good thing, a positive thing for Miguel Perez. And you can see this as a noticeable evolution of his game this year. So Bradley Carnell has given so much trust in Miggy Perez, especially with the Jabulu Blom injury. And Perez has continuously rewarded him. Yes, he's had some mistakes here and there, and some growth as a player and some learning opportunities. But my goodness, if you look at FOTMob, he was their player of the match. And the amount of passes that he had into the final third, the amount of successful tackles that he had a great game, and he rewarded himself with a goal there at the end off of that Leuven corner. And whether it was his head or his chest, that is just an iconic moment that is going to be remembered as having come against Chicago. Yes, you'll know that we lost the game, but that was a battle that was notable to win, and I think we have to celebrate that.
Yeah, I think as a side note, I've been kind of talking behind the scenes with guys who watch the national team, that U20 national team roster drop today. And, Pukstas was in it, and there's talk about him joining in the group stage, not in the initial stages. And so I've been asking around, I'm like, what about Perez? How far away from that depth chart do you think he is? And he's not on the radar right now. I'm just going to be honest. But, what did we say, Matt? Isn't this his fourth start of the season? This Open Cup game was?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's not a small amount for a 17 and 18-year-old. So, if he keeps on this road, I'd like to see him continue in that. He's got some improving to do, but, I thought he looked very good in this game as well. I don't know if was there more that you saw, like reasons, some of the things he was doing that did put him as one of the best players, according to that website?
Oh, his passing, he had like an 80-some% passing completion. His key passes into the attacking third. He was kind of like the 6 that we've been needing, where
Yeah.
he's in that defensive end, but he's making some really key passes through the midfield, facilitating things up to Eddie Leuven.
Definitely our closest thing to Blom. If Blom is out, like Perez fills that role almost perfectly, right?
Yeah, I think, and he's grown into it. So there was a lot of,
Yeah.
and he's going against some bigger guys, right? In our defensive end. So his ability to learn and adapt to MLS and the physicality in the league has been pretty noteworthy so quickly. Having 3 league starts and 4 total starts. Yeah, it's impressive.
Yeah, there's been improvement for sure. Growing into the game is well said there, Matt. Anything else about this game before we move on to the next section here?
Well, it was also the first time that Miggy Perez played all 90. And so that's notable when you talk about what could happen this weekend. I think it goes back to everybody's still on the table because there's been from Tuesday to Saturday a significant amount of rest. But him having gone 90 is notable to me. Those 20 passes into the final third. Edward Leuven again had the most chances created in this match. Jared Stroud had 2 of the best opportunities to score. Things to keep in mind as we're looking at specific players that we are maybe predicting or will see this Saturday. But some of the other things that, keeping in mind the flow of the game, is ideally going to be vastly different. Chicago won the duel battle against us. They won the tackle battle, and they clobbered us in interceptions. So 79 duels to our 57 won, 23 tackles to our 18, and they had 21 interceptions to our 5. They were putting themselves in the lanes very, very well. And that, I think, is a byproduct of their ability to drop back into space, in defend in spaces that we were trying to create, as opposed to playing their traditional style, which is more akin to us. So you don't allow that early goal, which ideally we won't. And I think the transition for me from Tuesday to Saturday is it should be a vastly different game than what we saw for the majority if we can keep them off the score sheet early.
Interesting. Yeah, the stats that they really destroyed us on that you listed there, Matt, duels won, tackles, interceptions, those are things that they're already good at. And I think you nailed it too in saying that I think them sitting back really magnified their talents rather than, challenging them in any way. So they're a tough team to beat in those ways. And I hope that we have a more open game coming up. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. But first, you and Santiago were able to go to the press conference this week, and I'd love to hear about some injury updates and a few other things that you have for us here.
Yeah, there were. It was kind of a somber press conference, to be fair, and
it has been for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, Indiana Vassilev was there in particular, and Santi and I were lamenting that he wasn't his usual joyful Indiana Vassilev. He had an aura about him that was like, we got business to take care of. It wasn't like don't get me wrong, it wasn't a woe is me. It wasn't like we're down, we don't know what's going on situation. It was, we got beat and we know what we need to do, because Vassilev, Carnell, they all mentioned how the way that the team starts off has to be better. There has to be more fire coming out of them, to borrow the Fire's moniker, right? But there has to be more drive and determination to play the ball and to come out firing, because what we saw against the Chicago Fire team on Tuesday can't happen. And I think they're very, very aware of that. Having watched tape, they talked about how often they were looking at it. They know what they need to do right off the bat. And if you can do that and sustain that, then they kept mentioning how getting back to your principles and getting back to your play style, that can happen if you don't let up like they did early on. And aside from just talking about, watching tape and those kinds of factors, the biggest thing to come out of the press conference were updates on Joao Klaus and Rasmus Alm, which are that both are out for Saturday. They did not practice with the team. They're still recovering. It's going a little slower than Carnell had first hoped with that 10 to 14 day prognosis. And I was telling somebody earlier, this is why Carnell doesn't give estimates for time, and he's very vague, because when it doesn't work out and somebody's out longer, you get this kind of response. Unlike Jabulu Blom or Tim Parker, who are the opposites, right? So Blom was supposed to be out for 5 to 6 weeks, and he came back, I think, right at 5, maybe a little before 5. And Parker was only out for a week with his groin injury. So quick recoveries there, a little longer than we hoped for Klaus and Alm, who's out with an abdominal injury that I believe he sustained in practice last week. It was right after the Portland match. So those are going to be unavailable. And the biggest considerations for that is those are two of our highest octane attackers. Klaus's presence and the way he changes games for us is known now. I don't think there's any doubters in St. Louis anymore, unlike the first week or so where people, all they saw of Klaus was from City 2 last year. I think it's now, who can we have to create those chances? How are we going to hold up play? How are we going to be successful in the final third without Joao Klaus and without Rasmus Alm, who, man, Rasmus Alm is like a Jabulu Blom. He was just getting into form really, really well before suffering this injury, again, being out. He's somebody who I think when he has a run of a few games, people are really going to come around to Alm is our right mid, and he belongs there. I said he was one of the best right mids in the game a few games ago, just because, or in MLS rather, but he needs more time to show that. He's showing flashes of brilliance. We don't have two of our main attackers, so how are we going to utilize maybe our midfielders? Because now we have the depth of midfield, and we're going to talk about our predictions in our lineup. We're going to talk about who we expect to fill those roles, but you have people like Nico Gioacchini who didn't see all 90. You have Celio Pompeu who saw 90, but has been rested. You have Indiana Vasilev who has attacking experience. And so I asked Vasilev about his positioning, and he wasn't joking around anymore at this point. He was just saying, I'll play. I can play anywhere they want me to. And I firmly believe that if we have a lineup that rolls out with Blom, Leuven, and Vasilev will find his way into the attacking third. And there's some stats that we're going to talk about later that have to do with balls in the final third, balls in the penalty box. And let me tell you, Vasilev is near the top of our team in that.
Good stuff. That's actually, I was scared of doom and gloom in that regard, but I'm glad we might have some.
Oh, there's some of that too, but there's some positivity. I can't doom and gloom without positivity. That's not my style.
Well, that's what I love about you. Thank you, Matt. You're listening to Flyover Footy. We are on the big 550 KTRS. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Let's dig into the preview of Chicago Fire. You hinted on a few starters, and we're going to hit that at the end, I think, pretty good.
Yep.
But why don't you lead us into this next section about where St. Louis and Chicago stand and some of the things to look for in this game coming up.
Yeah, we went through pretty deep on some of the on-field stuff with the Fire, but let's take a step back and look at the MLS picture. St. Louis is still second in the West, still fourth in the Supporters Shield standings with 19 points, a 6-3-1 record, 3-1-1 away, 22 goals, 10 goal differential in MLS play. We still are in the lead with goals and tied for the best goal differential in the league, despite our last run of form. Chicago sits 14th in the West, 14th in the East with 11 points, a 2-3-5 record, 1-0-5 at home with 13 goals total this year and a -3 goal differential. That is important because it's what got Ezra Hendrickson, their coach, fired. And so they're looking to Frank Klopas to get that new manager bounce, which started Tuesday, hopefully doesn't run over. But just looking at the last few games, the run of form for both teams, St. Louis's run of form has been less than stellar. Our last 3 MLS matches, so not counting what we saw against the Fire. 2 weeks ago, we had a 2-1 loss at home against Portland. We had a 1-1 draw in Colorado. And then we had a 5-1 win at home against FC Cincinnati. We know the game against Dallas was abandoned, and we know that we lost against Fire. So we started off 5-0 in February and March. We've gone 1-3-1 in April with 3 losses, and including our likely toughest single month of the entire year. It's also notable in those last 3 league matches, so Dallas, Portland, and Colorado, since FC Cincinnati, we have less than 1 expected goals per game in each of those. So you're seeing the chance creations, you're seeing the shots and opportunities at a very low rate overall for City, and the advanced stats back that up. And then Chicago's last 3 MLS matches were a 3-0 loss at Nashville, which they were running a rotated lineup because they saved quite a few of their attacking players, their attacking starters for St. Louis. So that's taken with a grain of salt for me. They had a 1-1 draw against New York Red Bull and a 2-1 loss at Atlanta. A couple notable things for the Fire are that they have not scored more than 2 goals since March 25th at Miami, and their last home loss was September 17th, 2022, a 3-2 loss against Charlotte.
There's an interesting storyline that came out this last week once St. Louis started losing. I know Ben Wright is someone I follow and respect, but he posted that no wonder St. Louis is struggling and looked so good in the beginning of the season because they played some of the worst teams in MLS, as it turns out, after a few weeks. That is true to some extent. I'm trying to find where Cincinnati is. Cincinnati's second.
Cincinnati's one of the best teams in the league. So
that's an outlier.
Yeah.
But it might be the only outlier. I don't know.
The Earthquakes
really was the time to beat them.
The San Jose Earthquakes is one of those teams that at the time they were a bubble team for the playoffs, but they've had a great run of form. They're now sitting 4th in the West. So we do have a few teams to hang our hats on.
Yeah.
Portland is even in the playoff picture right now. But yeah, he's talking about Salt Lake, Austin, Charlotte. So you could cherry pick data to make your point all you want.
Yeah.
It's half and half if you're looking at it from a standings perspective.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, and I guess I just want to pose the question, because this is a theory that I have, is that if you were to kind of make a chart of people who sit back and counter versus people who are willing to come at us, in a certain way, that we do really well against people who are just coming at us with an open system, or, the way that Dallas played us, the way that Cincinnati played us, versus people like Minnesota and Colorado. Yeah, we didn't lose against Colorado, but it felt like one. So there's just like a style of play that really gets us, and we've had a lot of those lately. And I think that may be the only thing we're looking at here. It's just a theory of mine. I don't know what you think of that, Matt.
Yeah, and that goes to passes per sequence to me. So there's those 2 stats that I love to tout on every one of our shows: direct speed and passes per sequence. And so teams that are among the highest in passes per sequence that we've played this year are Seattle, FC Dallas, Austin, Colorado, San Jose, all teams that gave us trouble to an extent. And then those earlier teams, so all those teams except San Jose, the Colorado, the Austin, FC Dallas, and Seattle, are some of the least direct teams. So they work the ball around the field. They possess the ball. So that is backed up again to the advanced metrics that those teams give us trouble. We have success against teams like we've had success against Portland. We've had success against Real Salt Lake. I say we don't know Chicago because the game changed on a dime there in the 3rd minute, but those are the kinds of teams, FC Cincinnati, who are more direct with the ball, less passes per sequence. So they're working the ball up more vertically and trying to not possess, the St. Louis style, essentially. And so we've had success against those kinds of teams.
Yeah, so I guess the theory about like the defensive shape and the defensive style, I guess, I'm not sure. I'd love to find a metric that would kind of lay that out really easily. But I don't know. The passes per sequence isn't necessarily proof in the pudding, would you say?
No, it's not. It's not proof. There's a couple teams that bounce back and forth, and I guess it depends on some of those formations. Like FC Cincinnati had a 3-man back line, and we found a lot of success against them. So are teams that run a wing back system more susceptible to our verticality? Do teams that try to spread the field wide allow more space in the middle for us to work through? There's arguments that can be made either way on that. And I do think there's merit to it, though.
Yeah, I do too. To some extent, but I don't think we've nailed it down yet. That's something we'll be watching and updating throughout the season. Something I'll be watching for at least. Matt, I know you got a lot more stats. Thanks for letting me do my rabbit trail there. Why don't you lay some more on us?
Yeah. So some stats for the teams. So where teams are is in possession, shots, those kinds of things. So we saw that both teams and both teams are in that upper quadrant of very direct speed, very low passes per sequence. Chicago, in fact, is the 2nd highest team when it comes to direct speed with the ball, second to St. Louis. They're top 5 when it comes to lowest passes per sequence. They want to move the ball up the field. We saw that in the first 3 minutes. They were very adept at doing that, in winning these aerial battles We're going to talk about styles in a little bit, but all those lead to both teams averaging less than 50% possession throughout the season. Both teams average pretty similar shots and shots on goal, with St. Louis averaging about 12.7 shots, 4.8 on goal. Chicago, 11.5 shots and 3 shots on goal. So there aren't many shot chances created on goal. And then looking into the total passes, Chicago has just a hair under 400 total passes per game, which lines up with that less than 50% possession. St. Louis has about 350 passes. And what that means is those passes per sequence are very low. We're more successful when we're not having plus 400 passes per game, which is what we happen against the Chicago Fire on Tuesday. Some of the dual battles, we average 60 dual wins. They average 57, which is markedly different than what happened on Tuesday. It was pretty much flipped on that. Tackles, we average 12.9 tackles. They average 11.6. So again, we're used to winning. If you look at us comparatively, we would be winning, all things equal, the metric battle in duels and tackles and passes the way we want to play. But when you have something that happened on Tuesday occur, that's why I think the rest of that game, and I've said it before, I'll say it again, is not exactly what we can hope to see this coming Saturday. And then looking at overall in the league, some of the notable stat categories in league leadership, I mentioned St. Louis still leads the league in goals and goal differential. Well, we also lead the league in goals inside the 18. A lot of that coming with Klaus, though. So if you look at the difference, and this is why some of these stats are difficult to put into perspective in our current state, is a lot of the success we had in becoming league leaders was with Klaus. And so we haven't found that identity yet without him. I mentioned the less than 1 expected goals per game playing into all of this, where other teams are catching up to us pretty quickly on this. There's a physicality aspect that I think is going to be interesting to watch. And we saw it out of Jared Stroud, especially in the match on Tuesday, where St. Louis is 3rd in the league in fouls with 164 total through 11 games or 10 and a half games. We only have 23 yellow cards, though. So tactical with our fouls, smart. We're aggressive, but not overly aggressive. Chicago, on the other hand, is 4th in the league in yellow cards with 27. They only have 127 fouls committed, so less fouls, more yellow cards. This is something we can definitely take advantage of if we're able to put the ball into anywhere near the attacking third to create some of those set piece opportunities, because Chicago is a little more willing to foul in some dangerous spots. And then
I want to add to that too. Like, there's 3 penalty kicks conceded by Chicago Fire too, which is the most in the league. They're tied 3 ways, but that's interesting too, because we talked about that chart last week, how St. Louis is way outperforming the goals that they should have according to whatever stats. And Stuart mentioned it perfectly there, that some of that could be that we haven't gotten a penalty kick, or we've only gotten 1 this season. So, maybe some extra dives from Nico in this one. We could grab another PK in the box. That'd be nice. I would take it at this point.
He's had a few opportunities where we just need to get bodies in the box, control the ball well, and draw those fouls, and that'll do it. Yeah. There's a lot of stylistic things that match up really well for St. Louis on here. We talked about those 2 stats, but also high turnovers. Both teams with their pressing are top of the league in high turnovers forced. Chicago's actually better than St. Louis. Now they have an extra half game on us, so that might be part of it, but they're higher than us in high turnovers forced. But we're better with our forcing high turnovers and ending them in shots. So they have 104 high turnovers forced, meaning they're pressing us in our defensive third and they're forcing turnovers. And 14 of those 104 have resulted in a shot. We've had 99 and 19 have resulted in a shot. 3 of those goals, but those were some of the back passes that happened earlier in the year. So again, grain of salt with those. But in general, we are 2 of the highest teams in forcing these high turnovers. Expect a lot of pressure on the ball in each team's defensive third. So the way that our center backs work the ball out to our midfield, the way that our wingers work the ball up the field, getting quickly out of our defensive third is going to be incredibly important in this game.
Can you repeat that stat? It was the turnovers, the high turnovers that resulted in shots. What was it, Chicago versus St. Louis in those?
That resulted in shots, 14 for Chicago, 19 for St. Louis.
Okay, good. Okay, I was hoping we were better, but I missed the Chicago one. I apologize.
Yep.
A couple other things that I've noticed is, Chicago's toward the middle bottom in shots against, and they only have one clean sheet this season. And so that's something that St. Louis could definitely try to take advantage of. And what you're saying there, Matt, the way that they press high, their high turnover rate, it makes sense, right? When you're doing that, it's really easy to get taken advantage of in the defensive third. So Chicago has a similar problem to what we've had in the last few weeks. That could be something maybe we can use fire versus fire. Oh man, I did that on accident as well. But fifth in duel percentage and interceptions. You kind of alluded to that with some of your stats, but Chicago Fire, they put in a shift, right? They're really good at that kind of stuff. So those are the two that I'm looking at. It was something that not many teams have beaten us in that, but Minnesota was one that kind of out-dueled us. And I think there have been a couple teams that have gotten us on the day, but it felt like Minnesota actually is good at that and did beat us in the day in those stats for me. Matt, I see here that you have a couple key players that you would like to talk about here.
Yeah, so some of the players we saw on Tuesday, some of the players that didn't feature or maybe are returning from injury are worth paying attention to. So Kai Kamara, obviously, we know he's going to be important to pay attention to. I think he'll start. He's third all-time leading goal scorer in MLS. And St. Louis is one of the very few teams that he doesn't have a goal against. So this, preventing him from getting on the score sheet is going to be a little badge of honor for St. Louis that I hope to see. Other notable players for Chicago just to pay attention to. So number 8, Chris Mueller. He's got some national team experience. He just returned from an injury. He may be injured. I saw a report that he had picked up something possibly after the Tuesday game. He only played a half on Tuesday, so it'll be interesting to see if he's actually in the starting 11. Brian Gutierrez, homegrown number 17. He's been playing some number 10, the number 10 position, switching on and off with Shaqiri a little bit. But the prevailing thought right now is he's going to shift back out wide while Shaqiri takes that number 10, at least how Frank Klopas.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go Phil. I just wanted to speak when you were done, but that's a major storyline for this one is that a lot of people are saying Chicago Fire fans think that Gutierrez might have surpassed Shaqiri. So, I thought he looked really good in that Open Cup game. Shaqiri only had a couple really amazing moments that were like flashes of himself. Yeah, you know what I mean? But Gutierrez, man, he put in a good shift. He looks like one of the better players for the Fire, in my opinion, and he's young, so that's really fun.
Oh, absolutely. He's definitely a bright spot, and he's not going to sit. I don't see him sitting. So if Shaqiri starts, he just shifts wide. It's not like I think Shaqiri will take his spot.
The other part of that story, though, is that people prefer him centrally, and so that's the hard part. Yeah. He's not as effective wide, but that's just fans. I think fan talk, but it's a good story to watch.
Right, Shaqiri only played 45 on Tuesday, though, too.
Exactly, yeah. And we're a little short on time. I was just going to see if you could hit up. I'm curious about Jairo Torres. I don't know if I said that right.
Yeah, Jairo Torres, young DP forward. So he had surgery at the end of last year to repair a left tibia stress fracture. So he missed the last bit of the season in 2022. He's been out with a hamstring injury lately. So kind of a bit of bad luck. He's only played a couple matches. It seems like he's been cleared to play. He hasn't been on the injury list, and Frank Klopas said that he should be returning. So whether that means starting, whether that means starting to see minutes like Jabulu Blom did for us, Jairo Torres is going to be an interesting player to watch out for. Number 20, young DB forward, whether he is able to crack through maybe alongside a Kai Kamara or just underneath on maybe the left side. That'll be a very interesting thing to watch.
Well, we better do. I'm so sorry, Matt, but we better do our lineups. And if you can fit any of these storylines into your lineup, let's do our lineups, and we got to get out of here.
I always talk too much when it comes to the Chicago Fire. Let's do it. All right. So my predicted lineup, I had this a couple days ago. I'm going to stick with it. I think we're going to run Berkey and net. That's obvious. I think we're going to get back to our primary back line minus Parker because he's suspended. So we have Johnny Nelson, Kyle Hebert, Lucas Bartlett, Jake Nerwinski. In the midfield, I think we're going to give Jabulu Blom a start. I think he went 12 minutes on Tuesday. I think he has the fitness worked up, and I think he's going to be a core component of our midfield. How long he plays, I don't know, but I think he's going to be in our midfield alongside Indiana Vassilev, which means I think Edward Leuven is going to be pushed up a little bit, and this is a big storyline that I'm going to want to watch with a healthy Jabulu Blom is what do we do with Indiana Vassilev and what do we do with Edu Leuven? My ideal lineup here is going to be either a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-4-2, where you might push Leuven all the way up, but you at least get him centrally into that number 10. Wide, I think we're going to have Jared Stroud and Tomas Ostrak, and then Nico Giochini up front.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what we'll see, but I do have a feeling we're going to see Jubilo Blom. I hope we get a lot of him, at least 30 minutes if he doesn't start. But I'm interested to see the same thing, Matt. I'm interested to see who's going to play in this one, whether Indiana Vasilev and Blom and Leuven can play. Possibly if Leuven's at the 10. I think they saved Ostrak for this game. He came in the 59th minute, so I think he's going to start at the 10 in this one. In my opinion, I'm just getting those vibes, but he may play on the wing. Leuven may play the 10. Wouldn't surprise me at all. So that's something to watch. We have run out of time here, and I apologize. I didn't watch the time as well as I usually do, but obviously we're a podcast. Flyover Footy, we're a podcast. We've been doing this since 2015 in some form or fashion. So please do listen to us after we do this radio show on our podcast, which you can find on Apple, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts. We realized that we need to start asking people to please fill out a review because we've been just falling down the charts, and we have a feeling that we never asked for that. So if you enjoy the show, please do fill out a review. Hopefully it's a positive one. We'd love to hear. Our DMs are open if you have any critique. We'd love to improve and get better for you guys. But please check us out there. We got YouTube, we got Twitter, we got Instagram. We do videos, we do clips through the week. Lots of news from Matt Baker and Santiago on Twitter. So please do check us out. And again, leave us a review. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. It's Flyover Footy. We're on the big 550 KTRS. Everybody enjoy the game in another 30 minutes. Bye-bye.
Go City.
Sorry, Matt. I really cut in a lot on that one. I need to be quicker when I do.
You are all good. You might want to edit out that in 30 minutes piece because we're airing on Friday at 8 this week.
Every time I say something, it's only when I say something. I have
it was the last thing you said. It was like the last thing you said though. So I think you can. Yeah.
It's fine. All the mistakes, all the edit points are my problem. I also said something about damned or something. I got to make sure it's okay for me to say that. I think it is, but I don't want to make it.
I think damned is good. Like damned if you do, damned if you don't type thing.
Yeah.
I think you're fine.
And then my station call was effed up. So otherwise, I'm just going to clean that up tiny.
I did like how your ask for review was like, we're falling down the charts.
Well,
bring us up.
I give you a lot of trouble for being so competitive. I mean, it's in me. If I haven't said it, like I do feel the same way. So I hope I'm not being too hard on you. I'm there with you.
I know you are. I'm going to go grab a drink real quick.
Okay. Ryan Cole, thanks for the comments, man. We'll talk about some of these things in the wind down, which is what we're about to head in here if you're still around. What's up, Joseph? Good to see you, man.
Do you want to do Q&As or did we?
Well, let's start with Q&As and then let's circle back to anything we missed.
Yeah.
I know there's the questions for STL players. I really wanted to dig into that, and we just had no time.
All good.
Yeah, next time I'll give you more. Whenever I stick, I'm trying to give you minutes.
I saw you do this, and so I was like, oh my god, do we have 1 minute left?
No, I'll put up a fist if I want to say something after you're saying something. I
like it. We should have those cues.
Because that way you don't have to stop. I don't want to cut you off, but when you're at a stop,
I usually don't stop mid-sentence.
No, you never do. I shouldn't have done this. That was a bad call. But yeah, let's start with Q&As and we'll get on with it. Hit record. All right, everybody, we're back. It's the wind down, and it's become a bit of a tradition to start with Q&As. And that's awesome because that means everyone's been giving us questions for the last several weeks. And
I really like this part of it. I sometimes it's stressful to try to get as much in that 45 minutes as we do. I think we do a pretty good job, especially when you have midweek matches. It's tough, but I really like the flexibility it gives us to just go deep into some of these questions. Because end of the day, like, I don't want to talk in my own bubble. I don't want to be in my own sphere. I want to know and talk with other people and try to, help understand or talk through some of the things that people who are listening to us are thinking.
Yeah, this is. I hope it's not political in any way, but I listened to this news show about, like, I guess Trump did like a town hall meeting on CNN or something, and they talked about how terrible the questions were from the news people, but then the crowd got to ask questions and how amazing the crowd questions were, and it's totally like the same idea for us. Like, we get in our bubble and we get a little too in the know or inside baseball kind of stuff, and everyone who asks a question can definitely play a part in keeping us out of that.
Well, like when you plugged leaving reviews at the end of the 45, my first thought is like, I love talking about soccer. I could probably do it in just my basement if nobody's listening to me, but there's a massive joy I get in any semblance of education that I can help with. It's not like I'm the end all be all, far from it, but it's just like I loved researching this and looking things up so much, and I would rather tailor it to what somebody's wanting to know. Like, I spent time today looking up answers to what people were asking, and I just like to do it. And so those are the kinds of things that's like, if people are going to leave reviews, it's like, all right, I want to find value in what I'm listening to. I don't want to just have St. Louis talk on in the background. I want to learn something, or at least feel like this has enabled me to know more about the game that I'm watching.
Yeah. And the input and questions from you guys actually helps me as well massively. And what I wanted to say lastly is that, like, 3, 4, 5 years ago, I would be like, does anyone have questions for this week's podcast? We get none. So
yeah,
it's really amazing that people listen. So thank you. If you're hearing this, if you've sent a question, I love it. So here's one from Todd. Todd says, we're in second place with a game in hand on the first place team. It may be because I'm a Southampton fan too, and my perspective has changed on what constitutes a successful season. But do you think fans are overreacting to a poor 15% of the season, considering the outside expectations for the club preseason and where we stand in the table currently? Great question, Todd.
I loved this question, and we could probably spend 45 minutes on this.
Yep.
Because we, having done this podcast for so long, we've talked about expectations. We've talked about what happens if we start the season 0-5. Are fans going to stop selling out City Park? Are fans going to turn on the team and never come back? And it was quite the opposite. So we know that the expectations going into the season from the national media were wooden spoon winners, meaning worst team in the league. We know that in St. Louis, we just have generally high expectations for our teams, I think. And so locally, to me, it was more, I'm just happy to be here to start it off, right? I don't think anybody looked too far ahead. I think people digested a lot of those national media, and it kind of skewed what they were thinking a little bit. I know I did. So I'm not thinking we're going to win Sporter Shield, but at the same time, seeing national media talk about the things that reasons why we're going to finish last place, some of it started to permeate through, even though I'd been watching City 2 and the academy build and all that stuff. So it's like, okay, does this have merit? And so you put all that together, and to start the season, I definitely think it's a happy to be here model. I went to Austin, and there's no St. Louis fan that I went with who said, I'm expecting to win. Nobody. And once you win 5 in a row, that all changes, because it's not in the weeds of there's a specific style of play that we're playing that other teams just have yet to figure out. The other shoe's going to drop. It's that we've figured MLS out. It is a bit of that cockiness that got to us. So as we've come down this second block of games, as Bradley and Lutz like to refer to it as sometimes, you see that blueprint. And all of that is essentially a course correction of expectations, where you do have that massive ebb and flow. But go back to what we initially thought. Playoffs would be a fantastic finish to the season. Like, that is still the bar to me. We made it so easy on ourselves by the start that we had, to where we only basically have to average a point per game the rest of the way and we'll probably make the playoffs. Keep those expectations tempered because, like we talked about in the first 45, we had a system. Teams didn't figure it out. Then teams figured it out, and now we're struggling, and that's where we kind of are right now. Mm-hmm. Once we figure out the blueprint and it starts to be a more significant, more genuine back and forth of teams about we know different ways that we can change our game plan to fit our system depending on what the other team is throwing at us, and we know it works each way. Once we get to that level of maturity in our organization, it's going to be a whole different ball game. And then we can talk about, all right, we're able to bounce back and flow with these kinds of things. But I do think, to the exact question, that fans are overreacting to a poor 15% of the season, not just because of that, but because of the lack of Joao Klaus in this most recent run of form. And yes, it is putting a lot on one player to say, if we're missing this one player, then we're less than, or we don't have depth there to be able to compensate. That's a problem that I hope to have rectified in the summer transfer window. I think that is something that has to have been seen, accepted, and acknowledged by the team, is that if you can't figure out a way to win with Joao Klaus, you need to bring in another Joao Klaus.
Is that the answer? I don't know. I do think like losing Klaus and not having someone like him, I think Ryan Cole earlier was like, I would love to see someone get a cross in, and yes, perhaps in the Open Cup game, but then again, like, do we have someone who can score on an aerial cross? A low cross for sure, but we saw how many times we were just beating our head against the wall against Portland, just sending crosses in, and it just didn't work. So, the Klaus thing is an interesting thing. Every couple of weeks we'll bring up the fact that Joachim Nilsson is still out. And so, looking at the way that Chicago scored against us, would a Parker and Nilsson combo have let that go in, even with Pedro there, depending on whether, we talked about that earlier. Also, that kind of a goal is the kind of goal that like a Jabulo Blom is the kind of guy that can stop those kind of counterattacks if we want to have a lone six kind of thing. Even if we play Leuven and Blom, that seems relatively counterattack proof to whatever extent you can even say that in modern soccer. So just things to think about, like whatever that blueprint is to get past this downfall that we've experienced here, to figure out the blueprint everyone's been using against us that Taylor Twellman has mentioned. We got to figure out how to counter that. And there are so many options for that. And there's a lot of time left, like we said. So this is like, how do our players respond? How does our coaching staff tactically respond? That's going to be kind of the two things that I'm going to be looking for this week.
Yeah, player personnel plays a huge factor in this to me, because when you saw the roster that we had built, you saw depth at a lot of our attacking positions. We always thought there was a lack of depth at central midfield, not considering Indiana Vasilev would really find a home there for us this year, almost out of necessity because of Jabulo Blom's injury. But don't forget, earlier in the season, the ideal starting lineup for City was Blom and Leuven in central midfield.
Yeah.
And so if we are able to find our way back to that, or maybe use that as the point of growth and get to a spot where Indiana Vasilev is now a number 8 type of a player, because he's shown an ability to do that this year. He's shown an ability to play two ways. He's shown an ability to possess in the midfield, keep the ball, and move it forward very quickly. There's some stats that I've got that back that up. But if you do that along with the Miggy Perez growth, and you can move Edu Leuven higher up on the field and let him be more of a creative outlet as opposed to a two-way, as opposed to a destroyer, that gives you so many different options compared to what we thought we had at the beginning of the year. And it gives you more depth in more spaces.
Mm-hmm. Completely agree. From Daniel, he has this question on Twitter: with Klaus, Alm, Parker out, and Blom not starting, how does this club generate chances, let alone goals? I hate to say it, but I think we get shut out 2-0 on Saturday. This club is lost in the final third.
I mean, this
is a mix of like the last question and the fact that there's unfortunately some truth in his question, right?
It's a very specific example of the last question, which I purposefully wanted to talk about this one second, because he's right. Klaus, Allman, Parker are all going to be out. I think Blom is going to be a candidate to start, but it's not a given. He only went 12 minutes on Tuesday, so it's still a bit of a leap, even if your fitness is progressing well, to say 12 to 45 to 60. That's a lot. And so if we don't have Blom out there, it changes things pretty drastically, because then you have to leverage likely Leuven and Vasilev, because we said Miggy Perez went 90 on Tuesday. He's going to play. He'll be available. I don't know if he'll be available to start. So that changes some of our look in the midfield. Edu Leuven leads our team in creating chances by a country mile. And it might be a good time to go into some of those stats. But the idea is our chances are created by Edu Leuven, by Jared Stroud, by our fullbacks, and by Indiana Vasilev. And so if we're able to get those guys up the field, involved in the attack, and provide service in general, doesn't matter yet if that's well received, but the ball needs to be placed in good positions. That's the start, right? So you have to have, you don't have to, like, if you take this one step at a time, you just have to move the ball up the field quickly and get it to a point where it can be crossed in. It can be, you can play a guy in the channels, or you can get a long shot off. Like if you can get the ball there, that's the first step. But then, assuming you can, and we've been adept at Johnny Nelson, Jake Nerwinski, Indiana Vasilev, and Edu Leuven doing that, then you get to our forwards of how is the ball going to be finished? Is it Tomas Ostrak? Is it Nico Gioacchini? We've seen flashes of them having success. Is it Celio Pompeu? But we haven't seen consistency. And there haven't been very many games without Klaus to enable consistency. So that's an argument there, is Klaus is only about to miss his third total game, if you count the US Open Cup as a game. And so Celio Pompeu just started coming into form as in our first Open Cup game. So there's a level of handoff that happened there between Klaus and kind of Celio Pompeu, but there hasn't been a big sample size of that. So MLS seasons are 34 games. They're long. They're drawn out. There's a lot that goes into that. Is 2 or 3 games enough of a sample size to say that Nico and Celio don't work? I don't think it is. I think the ball needs to be put into better positions for them to do work, because they're not types of players where they're going to hold up and create for others in a consistent way like Klaus. It's just a different mechanics, different style.
Yeah, and to kind of build on that some more, like just finding someone who hangs out in the final, in the box, in the 18. Like, I think it's better when we have Celio and Gioacchini, because we get a little bit of interplay between the two. But we just don't have someone who hangs around in the box and is able to create something with the ball at their feet. And that's what Klaus is incredible at. You know, you get the ball to him in a dangerous position. He's able to use his body or maneuver with his feet, his beautiful Brazilian feet, and score a goal, you know? And that's the kind of thing we need in the box right now. And that's why I don't like Leuven at the 10. I think he's the best playmaker we got on the team, but he's just better in the 8 position, because then he's got more guys in the box ahead of him. He's just not the guy that creates something out of nothing in the box with his feet or with his body. I think he's capable, but it's not his game. It's not what he's really good at. He's good at, we see him all around the box looking for people to pass to. And, you know, I think that's why I like having Ostrak in there, or Gioacchini and Celio. Like, it's at least better. But, you know, even if I'm not even sure Sam Adeniran would have been good at this. We never gave him the chance, I don't think. But, you know, if we were to pick someone up, if we're going to say, you know, should we get someone, you know, this is like you were saying, that it's the obvious thing to be like, well, who can we get to back up Klaus or to replace Klaus while he's hurt?
Bobby Firmino.
The obvious fix, right? Yes, it could be. And I think that's kind of what I'm getting at, is if we were to pick someone up in the next window, it doesn't have to be someone incredible, but someone who can make something of nothing in the box, a true 9, even Kai Kamara really would have been perfect as a backup, or someone lesser than him that has a similar style of play would be really cool. So if I want to venture into that world of negativity, part of the stuff we're fighting against right now, that's probably what I would say. But that's everything you said, which is true. Overall, we're doing so good. We should be happy to get into the playoffs.
Yeah.
Before our next adjustment, that kind of stuff is more where I live.
Remember those Ayo Akinola rumors before the season started?
Dude, I think of so many rumors. Nishiki, we talked about that. Are you on Twitter?
Oh, not to go on too much of a tangent, but when we're talking about bringing players in and our organization's ability to scout players and understand who would work and who won't.
I know.
Andre Shinyashiki is my go-to of why our organization can be trusted.
Yeah.
Because we had him on so many sheets of you got to pick him in the expansion draft. He's left exposed and he would be such an asset and he would be great in our attack. And hearing from Lutz after the expansion draft that all of the off the field stuff, all of the intangibles that would have made him a cancer, for lack of a better term, in our locker room. And nobody was talking about it at the time, but they knew it. And they didn't want to take the chance that the on-field talent outweighed or superseded that. It wasn't worth it to them. That sells me on their philosophy and mindset in signing players. So whoever we end up bringing in, because we will bring in people in the summer.
Yeah.
I trust that it will work. Just like when we signed a Klaus or Leuven or Selmer Pedro or any of those guys early. And we're like, this is our DP. I've never heard of this guy. What are you doing?
Yep.
And you see it work out. So, they've earned that kind of trust. One thing I will say though, is I do want to dig into the creativity portion of Daniel's question in some of the stats for our individual players. So if you're looking at key passes, which are passes that lead directly to a shot, Edu Leuven and Nico Gioacchini are tops in our team, 16 and 14 respectively. So you're seeing Nico Gioacchini be a facilitator in some, whether it's Klaus, because this does take into consideration the entire season, or anybody else. Klaus is fourth with 8 of those key passes. Indiana Vasilev has 9. So there's a lot of our upfront players playing off of each other in facilitating a pass that leads directly to a shot. The more interesting stats to me, though, passes into the final third and passes into the penalty area. Because this is where you really get into, it might not lead into a shot, but you're, like I said earlier, you have the ball in some dangerous areas, or you're putting the ball into dangerous areas. And the leaders in our team for passes into the final third are Edu Leuven, Indiana Vasilev, Jake Nerwinski, and Johnny Nelson. 55, 30, 26, 18. You're seeing where our balls come from when we're trying to create chances. They're coming from our fullbacks. They're coming from our central midfield, and they're coming in bulk like that. It falls off pretty drastically. Leuven and Vasilev have probably 2/3 combined for our team. Balls played in the final third. It's wild. And then passes into the penalty area. So this is where you really get into those dangerous passes. Edu Leuven again leads the team with 12. But then you have Jake Nerwinski and Jared Stroud with 9 each. Those are the crosses, right? So those are who's playing the ball well via crosses. And you saw it against Chicago in the first game. Jared Stroud had a few really good crosses there from the right side. Jake Nerwinski as well is a good facilitator of that. I think that these stats in general tell you where our creativity is coming from, whether it's good or bad. Edu Leuven is the overwhelming playmaker. He's the overwhelming person who's delivering all these chances. But you see our system really shine in our 2 fullbacks, our other central midfielder, putting the ball into the final third consistently. And you wouldn't expect your attackers to put the ball into the final third. You'd expect your attackers to be in the final third. And so in some ways, these numbers are obvious, but the volume in which they occur is where the problem is.
Well, and
right?
let's give a visual too, because when we talk about Leuven and Vasilev sending the ball into the final third, that's almost always them receiving the ball in the midfield,
Yep.
usually a little bit to the side, and then sending a cross ball to usually a fullback, sometimes a winger if it's Stroud or Alm or something,
Yep.
and then the cross in, right? That's like our system of play, and especially
Yep. To a
Vasilev,
T.
that's what he looks for first. Leuven will sometimes put in other different passes and stuff like that. So anyway, I just wanted to give a visual for what you're saying. That's exactly what we see and why those specific players are good at those statistical, things.
Right. It makes sense. Right.
Yeah.
But here's the problem. The style of play that we have is very direct. We've talked about this. We have very few passes per sequence. So when we look to make these passes, these are the primary passes that we use, and they're going to happen. They're going to happen often in an ideal situation where we're just sending the ball up very quickly. We're moving the ball up very quickly. But you would expect a decent amount of volume to these types of passes. One of the constant complaints is that we're not putting the ball into the box to create chances. We're not making we're not allowing our attackers to get the ball in good positions. And the volume numbers back that up. St. Louis is in the bottom 10 in number of key passes, meaning passes that lead directly to a shot. And so that's still a problem even in the vertical offense that we have in the pressing system, where if you're not passing to facilitate a shot, you're not going to have, it's not like we have a system where you have a high turnover and they immediately take the shot. Like that doesn't happen in bulk. And so having a low number of key passes is bad. Having a low number of passes into the final third is really bad. And so that's where you were talking, Phil, of you have our fullbacks, you have our central midfielders who are deep, and they're playing the ball into our final third. We don't carry the ball that much. There's not a whole lot of Indiana Vasilev or Edu Leuven just carrying the ball through the midfield, or having a number 6 carry the ball, or a fullback. We are dead last in the league in passes into the final third by a significant margin. We only have 247 total passes into the final third. A team like Seattle, remember playing Seattle? Seattle had 418 passes into the final third this year. The difference is staggering. Chicago has 311, so still significantly more than us. And especially in the last few games where we have possessed the ball a whole lot more. When you possess the ball and you're not able to pass the ball into the final third, the issue is magnified. So what are you doing with the ball if you're possessing it and not passing it into the final third? The other stat is passes into the penalty area. St. Louis is bottom 6 in total number of passes into the penalty area, tied with Sporting Kansas City of all teams. So this is how many passes you get into the 18-yard box. And there's two ways in which the ball ends up in the 18-yard box. It's you pass it in there or you play it in there as an individual player. And we've seen a lot of scenarios where we get the ball around the 18-yard box, but the fact that we're not connecting with these crosses in a more significant manner, the fact that we're not playing the ball into the box, I think is still a problem. And yeah, a lot of these numbers are low in MLS. The league leader is Vancouver of passes into the penalty area with 125. So it's not like 69 is a massively low number. It's like, I don't know, half of that. Most of the teams hover around 60 or 70. So we're not terribly different, but we're still lower on the end. These are the definition of chances not being created. And that's where I think we need to do a lot of our work, especially without Klaus, is passing the ball into these areas that will, whether it's in and of themselves or one pass later, facilitate a shot.
Yeah. And I want to use the next question to kind of kickstart another response to that exact subject. Joseph says, City has given up some early goals recently. Is there a change the club can make to start the game with a bang and put the other team on the back foot early? Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah. So, Matt, I think all the stats you mentioned, one caveat is that we do rely, like a lot of our playmaking is the high press, right? So we're looking for those turnovers high up the field where we can get a turnover, get a pass, and get a goal or something, or even just a turnover and a goal. especially if it's a back pass from a center back. That would be really nice to get again. But
the good old days.
Yeah, the good old days, right? So I do think that's why we're low in that stat. But, clubs haven't been making as many mistakes. So,
right.
The answer to Joseph is, step one would be to just make our press better and just make it so that we can get more turnovers than we've been getting lately and start the game so strong that we get some early goals from turnovers up high. That would be phase one, right? The thing that we've been drilling since all preseason, the thing that we're good at, we're supposed to be our bread and butter. And then if that doesn't work, everything Matt just listed is that has to get better. And those are in my opinion, those are the metrics that we need to be looking at after training. How can we train to make these metrics improve? What do we do when we're stuck with the ball 50% of the time? We got to figure that out. We got to become a possession-based team as a backup plan. I don't know, is that good or is that bad? I don't know if that's actually step two. Maybe that's a good question for the coach because, what happens if the press doesn't work and we get the ball? Do we just try to avoid that? Or do we make a plan to a failure plan, basically? I don't know.
Yeah, possessing the ball in and of itself hasn't worked for us. And it seems like it's not working because we're still trying to make them come at us. And so we try to draw them out to the point where we can then beat them quickly, whether it's over the top or with 2 quick passes up. So it's almost like we're trying to lure them, but they're not taking the bait. And when that happens, you're still trying to move the ball up quickly, except for this time the defense is bunkered low. And so they're cutting off the channels, they're cutting off passing lanes. They're putting themselves, and this is where it really happens, they're putting themselves into better positions to win these aerial duels. That's a huge problem for us, is if we're not winning aerial duels consistently, then we're not putting ourselves in position to win second chances, to move the ball up. Because I think that's probably the linchpin to how we can take a possession-oriented style and make it work for us. Is you are so adept at winning aerial duels. You're winning the ball from that. You're getting the ball into a position next to the person who wins the aerial duel to where they can then make a run. And so it's really counterattacking via the air, but it's doing so very deliberately with winning these duels. And if we're not winning the duels, if we're not winning the aerial duels, especially, that's how Chicago scored their first goal.
And that's what Portland was mind-boggling how often they got the second ball ahead of us.
Yeah.
I would say that game might have even been lost on that stat alone. I mean, that's a bold statement, but oh man, it was hard to watch in that regard. Those are all the questions. We don't have a ton of time. We don't want to take too much time. Matt, do you want to kind of hit one or two things before we go?
Yeah, there's a couple other things that I had on our team. So a couple keys to the game and players that I wanted to look at is I want to see if Johnny Nelson can continue to get more involved in our attack here. I think we are often at our best when he's moving higher up the field. He said that he likes to play. He's good at wing back. He's good at fullback, whatever we ask of him. But I think he's really good at being the facilitator to a Nico Gioacchini. So if he's more involved, if he's able to move higher up on the field and play off of our midfield on the left side, whether it's Vasilev or Blom or Leuven, if he can get up there and we're not sacrificing our defensive structure, we're going to find some success there. He should have a lot more assists than he does this year, but because MLS doesn't count an assist if the ball hits the opposing team, he's gotten kind of the raw end of the deal on that. He's as much of anybody as one person I'm going to be watching for. We saw the I don't want to say lack of effectiveness that Selmer Pedro had, because he was good in the moments that he had, but we
need to say that is that offensively he actually had several good in that game.
He was Selmer Pedro offensively did what we saw flashes of last year with City 2, where he's so high up on the pitch. He made it to the opposing end line a couple of times. and with success. So he's maneuvering the ball. He's very good with the ball. He's very good at finding space to give and go and to do some underlapping runs. But with Johnny Nelson, it's more of he's gonna push himself up, but to an extent. I almost feel like Selmir Pedro and Aziel Jackson have some similar qualities in their they're just gonna go and they're not gonna stop until they either run out of bounds or the ball's in the net. But with Johnny Nelson, it seems a little more deliberate in his, like, he's almost got a wall in the field where he knows he's not supposed to go too deep, like past the 18-yard box almost. And he gets into good positions there, but I want to see him get into more good positions because I don't think Chicago is going to defend him well. I'll say that. One of the other things real quick is just the roster considerations. So we talked a week or so ago about Caden Glover and Owen O'Malley in particular because they train with City. Caden Glover's been playing pretty regularly with City too. He played 69 minutes last night. We're recording on Thursday, so he played on Wednesday night against LAFC 2, played 69 minutes. Owen O'Malley didn't dress for that game. He didn't make the game day roster. So if anybody is going to be available from City 2, it would be Owen O'Malley. John Bell did start for City 2 as well. So there isn't much that's going to come from there. Important to remember because of some of the depth considerations with Klaus and Alm and Parker being out. Even with Jabulu Blom, you may need to shift an Indiana Vassilev up. You may need to keep Jabulu Blom in the midfield, and that may have some depth concerns with fullback that Owen O'Malley could help out with.
Yeah, I was shocked because I thought for sure, based on all the movements, him training with the first team, it set up perfectly for an Open Cup start. It would have made sense. I don't understand. I thought he was at least going to sub in, and then we saw Jabilo Blom play right back. I didn't understand it. I thought, let's blood him in the Open Cup and give him a good chance, and then perhaps start him in another game or sub him into another game. I'd like to get him up to speed, I guess. I'd like to have more the right back position.
You know what's interesting, though, is our staff has really shown a penchant for playing not everybody out of position, but playing players in different positions in which we think they're best suited for. So Bradley Carnell talked today about how Isak Jensen was more of a second striker against Chicago on Tuesday. And he admitted they played him out of position. And because they're trying to get him, they're pushing him, trying to get him to grow in new and different ways. And it also has, yes, a need depth-wise on our team. You mentioned that Isak Jensen did this last year for City 2. There was a question by, I think it was Daniel Esteves in the room today about Josh Dalling was suspended for a few games last year. We had to play without a legit striker. And so how did Carnell handle that? And it wasn't Carnell managing, but how did the staff handle that? And it wasn't well. We didn't perform well without Dalling last year, but we did use Isak Jensen up front. And so it really struck a chord to me that we did the same thing this year, and it didn't have many different results compared to last year. But Owen O'Malley, or rather Jabulu Blom, is similar to me in that regard, where he has history at playing at right back in South Africa. It's where he came up. It's where he played before transitioning to central midfield. But we played him there on his return instead of in the central midfield, almost just out of necessity from our roster construction and need, because it was very apparent that Akil Watts wasn't getting the job done. We needed a different look at right back, and Jake Nerwinski wasn't on the game day roster. He wasn't an option. And so Jabulu Blom was probably the best right back that we could have called upon in that sense, as opposed to like a Josh Yarrow, who he's played there once, I think, but he doesn't play. He doesn't have the experience that Blom has. So that Jensen, seeing what we've done with Vassilev, like there's definitely something to playing players to keep their talent on the field as opposed to where they have history at in their position.
And there are really good storylines in the recent past of really quality teams, some of the best in MLS, having the exact same problem. We just saw Talis Magno play like 5 games for New York City FC as a 9, and it didn't work. Everyone was saying too. Everyone was like, this is not his style. How good is that guy? I mean, he was up for the MVP last year. He's so talented. We saw Carlos Vela, I think last season, playing the 9 for LAFC because they had no other options. And they just kept moving people around, trying to figure out how to solve this 9 problem.
Talent supersedes all type of a situation.
Right. And it's just not true. It's not the case. And so, yes, Klaus is out. Not only is losing, Stuart said this the last 2 weeks, not only is it massively difficult to win without your DPs in MLS, it's just we've been using that profile of a player, and now we don't have him, and now we got to use a false 9 type of situation. We have no choice. And it's just, I just gave you 2 stories of why that's challenging everywhere in MLS. So no wonder we're struggling. Is it one thing? I'm not sure it's one thing. Do we still have to figure it out? Yes. And they've got a really hard road to pave ahead of them for that. And maybe Klaus coming back will fix it. I'm not sure it'll fix everything. But it's the next step is fixing these problems and figuring them out.
Yeah, there's something to be said by the fact that Klaus's injury didn't exactly coincide with our losing Skid. So I am totally with you that it's going to be great to get Klaus back, but he doesn't change the system that people have figured out. Mm-hmm. Adding Klaus back in the mix doesn't make the blueprint, as Twellman said, any different.
Yeah.
It just adds better talent to what City has to try to circumvent the blueprint. If you're really looking for the next evolution of how you can succeed in MLS, you have to, like I've said, like at least 2 or 3 times tonight, you have to figure out the blueprint and you have to beat the blueprint. You can't go back to your old ways and hope that the talent that you have currently is enough to eke something out. You got to figure out ways to win that aren't your tried and true.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's like I said, it's a tough challenge they got ahead of them. But we'll see what this is. I mean, this is what we live for. We get to watch the tactical struggles, and hopefully we get to watch some of the tactical fixes. And maybe the summer window is going to be the thing that fixes it. It could go that long, but I'm hoping that we figure out some things ahead of that. Thank you all for listening. We are Flyover Footy. Thank you for listening to the Wind Down. If you're still here, we enjoy it. Thank you for your questions. We'll be talking to you guys on Tuesday for Flyover Fallout. Matt's got something to say. Go for it.
Yeah, no, that's it. Tune in on Tuesday. We'll have the recap for the game. If you like what you're hearing, we said it in the first 45, but leave us a review. Let us know how we're doing. We really appreciate everybody listening. One quick plug too, locally in St. Louis, Soccer Master, store that we all know and love. They have a warehouse sale this weekend, and they're kind of having a prize for anybody who purchases something at the warehouse sale, a Tim Parker autograph memorabilia. So yeah, it's fun stuff happening locally. Good luck to everybody traveling up to Chicago. Bring home a win. Be safe in your travels. Have a good time. Be good stewards of St. Louis. And we hope to see you on the other side with a win.
Well said. Bye, everybody.